Welcome back, everybody, to Mondoid. Thank God I came up with that name at the last minute last time I made this. A little bit late. It's actually on a Wednesday. I have to apologize for that because, well, I was extraordinarily sick. Anyway, welcome to Mondoid, your one-stop shop for everything on the Project Zomboid Monday updates. This week was an interesting one, actually one that I actually really enjoyed. We're going to go over it a little bit. I'm not going to hit every detail because the bulk of this update, this one right here on Voices in the Darkness, was a 1 hour podcast that they have up. And you can come to the webpage and you can listen to it. But it's a 1 hour podcast. They actually touch on some very interesting things they've talked about in the past on the forums and through Twitter and whatnot. We're gonna touch on that momentarily. Going to go over some of the smaller things first. Other than the 1 hour podcast that they do talk about, down here they just a few small little updates as far as what other people have been working on, such as mashed potato or potassium or mash. I just call her mash. She's working on some new tile sets. It's going to allow for some piping tile sets, which allows her to write cool little messages, say like hello here. Just going to be neat for maybe like basement. I would assume something like basement tile sets, maybe something like a basement of a house, or I don't know, maybe those are rain gutters. You could do some rain gutters outside, but also it's going to allow for certain things like this, the warehouse, which is kind of cool because you can see the air ducts up top, allows for some escalation, some neat like little rafters that you can walk on, stuff like that, which I really like. Add some more flair, add some more variety, especially to the buildings that are already in the game. Something that's, I don't want to say it's desperately needed, because as of right now, even for a game in alpha, the game has some great variety as far as buildings go, but adding to that variety is something that you always want to do, especially with a game that is aiming to be as huge as it is. Trying to sidestep the repetitive textures or repeated building or frameworks and all that stuff. You don't want that to happen. So with her making new tile sets all the time and allowing her to make all these unique buildings is A-okay in my book. On top of that, looks like Binky over here has been working out bugs for enshrinkulation, which is something you can read up about. They don't really touch on enshrinkulation too much in this update. But basically what that means is that the sprites in the 3D is a lot slicker, it's crisper, as you can read here. It looks a lot better than what you would find in 2.5, and that's important to note because 2.5 looks really good. For all the things that it has wrong with it, 2.5, the one thing it had going for it was the new animation and the new sprite system. So with that, with hearing that the new 3D animation is looking even crisper and slicker for the upcoming RC3, that's got me really excited because I already thought 2.5 looked excellent. So I'm excited about that. It looks like Romaine Robert Johnson Drawn has been working on carpentry, ways that your carpentry level will govern the appearance of furniture and barricades you create, which is nice. So you can think about, for someone who's like a level 1 carpenter, and you're putting up barricades. Your barricades probably look like crap, right? Little boards with some nails, basically something you could throw up really, really quickly. Over time, as your character kind of survives the zombie apocalypse and learns better and better how to make more effective barricades, they'll look better, they'll look stronger, as well as them being statistically stronger. So that's kind of cool, and I'm sure that'll, pardon me, also feed into the whole building thing, where you're building like bridges and walls and all this stuff that will be much, as they said, they commented on my last Mondoid update. They talked about that, how carpentry will be a lot more difficult coming up in the RC3, so I'm sure that will play into it as well, the carpentry level. Let's see, community-oriented news. Oh, the website, that's the last little update, is basically almost finished. They wanted to have a screenshot for us for this week, but that's going to be pushed to next week because it's not quite screenshotable. Not a big deal. Looking forward to seeing the new website, as this one's a little bit old at this point. I mean, if you go to the main page, it definitely is old. But now let's get to the meat of it. Let's talk about the podcast real quick. I'm going to touch on the main thing they talked about throughout the podcast, the most important thing that they talked about in the podcast, and that is the metagame. Now, what is the metagame? Well, initially, when you played Project Zomboid, and the reason Project Zomboid, for a game that wasn't, the most graphically intensive game in the world, but still taxing on a lot of PCs, is because it loaded up the entire world all at once, so that it could simulate everything that was happening all at once. So, if you were in one part of town, the rest of the entire map was still loaded up. So NPC survivors that could have been the complete opposite end of the map are still doing their thing. They're still playing. The game is still being processed by the processor, and it's all being created by the computer. It's all preloaded. Now, what they've done, which I think is a phenomenal thing to do, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Minecraft does something similar, is the world around the player, there's a certain amount of the world doesn't automatically load up all at once, is what I'm trying to say. There is a particular amount of the world around the player's avatar that is loaded up. The rest is what is called the meta game. And everything else is kind of simulated outside of it. Now, this is going to be kind of difficult for me to explain, and I very much encourage you to listen to the podcast to see if you can get a better grasp on it. It's one of those things I understand but have a hard time describing. So what's going to happen is this allows, A, to be less taxing on PCs. It's just all-around better performing game because of that. B, what that's going to allow now is basically NPCs are not playing the game like you're playing the game. The game now creates scenarios where NPCs do things. So somewhere on the map, a scenario is created. NPC A runs into NPC group B. So one NPC runs into a group of other NPCs. It creates a scenario where one of the NPCs gets shot and killed, and that scenario is left there. So when you walk up to that scenario, say you're exploring, and that scenario is quote-unquote loaded, the game will now know, I must now load a dead body here because this scenario plays out in this area. And there's all kinds of different scenarios. So, group of survivors has a safe house scenario. You could walk up to it and walk inside of it, and now it's scenario of survivors in a house, surviving in this area. It now triggers these NPCs to load up. It triggers their dialogue options, and it triggers this event to happen because you're around it. Now, why did they want to do something like this? Well, there's a couple of reasons. A, like I said, extraordinarily taxing on your PC to load up the entire game. B, if you played the game, any of the prior types, either 2.0, 2.0 QR, 2.5, whatever, you would notice that in the beginning of the game, as you started surviving, NPCs would be pretty much everywhere. But because they were playing the game like the player was surviving, but their AI was far from good, essentially, they would quickly die. They didn't have the ability to survive. With this metagame now, it'll allow the NPCs to survive. They don't have to... The game doesn't go, all right, well, this not trying to manage these AIs who are trying to survive, and just because their NPC AI is very basic, they're not going to die off right away. Instead, it's loading up scenarios of NPCs. It's going to have stuff like where you run into a survivor house where there's a bunch of survivors. They've been there for X amount of time. You don't know how many survivors there are there. The game only loads up that scenario when you get close to it. Or, for example, load up a scenario when you get close to an NPC being attacked by zombies yelling for help. You can go help him. You don't know if he's bitten. You don't know if he needs, if he's pretty much doomed. You could ignore him. It creates all these emerging stories. And again, I am extraordinarily simplifying how this meta works. I'm kind of just giving you the bare, basic line of how it works, essentially. I highly suggest you go check it out. If you have the time, listen to the first 20 minutes of the podcast to get the best idea from the developers themselves. I mean, it's very interesting to listen to. It's very interesting to hear how this is going to work. And I think it's going to be really, really good for this game to have something like that. Because, again, one of the big issues with playing Zomboid was the NPCs were just dumb, so they would end up dying. But because now they have this metagame where these scenarios can show up and all these wonderful things can happen, this system will allow them to basically allow the feeling of other survivors to be around, and you will have the ability to interact and have all these stories come out, as opposed to just getting lonely and creating that one man against the world scenario where you build up a fort, and really all you ever need to do is go out for food every so often, and that's the game. That's not how they want it to happen anymore. And RC3 seems to really, really, really be taking some amazing steps towards making this game as difficult and as realistic as they can while still making it a game and making something accessible. You know, they don't want it to be impossible to play, but still maintaining all of that wonderful, beautiful, realistic gameplay elements that they've put into the game so far. And really, that's this update, this Mondoid update that they've kind of put out. I'm looking forward to a bunch of other updates. I got to go through some of the other Monday Zomboid updates because there's a few things that I wanted to check. I want to see if they've put out anything up about the inventory system because I know that's getting overhauled. And one of the other things actually I want to touch on is that it's actually they were talking about modders and how easy it is with this new meta update, with this new meta system, for modders to create their own scenarios, where the scenario could take place. All they got to do is plug it in, you know, pretty simply they made it sound. And now modders can tell their own stories, have their own scenarios pop up, basically allowing the modding community, which is games like these thrive on, to have the ability to load up an infinite number of scenarios that could potentially happen in the game. And that's awesome. So thank you so much, guys, for swinging by on this Mondoid update. I'm really, you know, as these come rolling in, I'm really excited. I apologize, this was a little bit late, but these are really fun for me to do, and I've been really, really sick. You could probably still hear it in my voice. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for swinging by.